paper 3, what works to connect women to digital technology? Simone, thank you.
All right, great. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And, I should maybe preface, I think the first session actually set this paper up well, and that what I'm going to be talking about is really the infrastructure. What does it take to connect women to smartphones? This is joint work with a large list of co-authors: Rohini Pandey, Charity Troyer-Moore at Yale, Erica Field at Duke, Natalia Rigol at Harvard, Georgia Barboni at Warwick, and 2 wonderful PhD students, Anwesha Bhattacharya at Harvard and Aru Shukla at USC. So bringing together multiple projects, it's been a long time coming. I should say some of these are very preliminary results. But we're excited to share them. So I don't need to really motivate this opportunity for this particular audience, but just to note that mobile phones are completely reshaping the economic lives of the poor. Some of the research that we've seen and talked about today illustrates that well, particularly within the DFS landscape. And kind of access to mobile internet has been growing incredibly rapidly, which is very, very exciting about the potential. On the theme of powerful women, you can I put up a couple quotes here from Melinda French Gates and Kamala Harris. In 2019, Melinda had, I think it was a LinkedIn post, just saying, for the world's most marginalized women, a mobile phone doesn't just make their old life more convenient, it can help them build an entirely new life. It's because connectivity is a solution to marginalization. Vice President Harris made a very similar argument, this year, kind of noting that this is these phones are a tool to really help give marginalized groups, including women, equal access to opportunity. This work that I'm going to be sharing is in India, where women are often quite marginalized, like mobility restricted, cut off from information, cut off from markets. And if you now have a tool that can bring all of that into somebody's hand, it could be completely revolutionary, right? And very, very exciting. Now, the problem is that gender gaps in mobile ownership, including smartphone ownership, and also if I put up a graph looking at access and use of mobile internet, you would see the same thing. These gender gaps are absolutely huge. And they're particularly huge in South Asia. That's kind of number one. You can see that there's sort of been some progress that happened around the time of the pandemic, but in the last 3 years, we've really been stalled at a gender gap around 40 percentage points, which is huge. And then Africa. Gaps are much smaller in other countries. So this is a problem, right? Because if you have this tool that you think is going to lift up the marginalized, like connect women to these markets and, sort of tools that are going to help make their lives better, but then that access is in and of itself unequal, this could end up sort of perpetuating, exacerbating gender problems that we know are already very important today. So there's a question, what can we do about it? We started this project way back in, I think, 2018, 2019, where we really started thinking about barriers to women's access and use of smartphones and mobile internet. And the thing is that there are multiple barriers. These barriers are kind of interlinked and intersectional. And the idea of this research program that we've been working on is to really kind of try to tease these apart and evaluate the impact of these different barriers. What I'm going to talk to you about today is first starting with economic constraints. When you're a low-income household, some speakers today have talked about how expensive phones are. It's expensive for households to have more than one phone. You kind of tie that up with gender norms. Who's going to be the person who has the one phone? It's not going to be the woman, right? And so, this points to a very simple solution, which is to say, well, maybe we should do free distribution of smartphones. And this is not kind of just like a pie in the sky idea. I'll show you, we're working to evaluate this in one Indian state that evaluated around 3 million smartphones. The state of Rajasthan actually just completed a program where I think they gave out about 6 million smartphones targeted to women. So this is a policy solution that people are kind of working on right now. Now, of course, having a phone in your hand might be great, but especially in this kind of environment where we have restrictive norms, it may mean very little, particularly if you don't know what to do with the phone. In fact, this could reinforce these narratives that, women really don't know what to do with this stuff. Like, why should I be giving them a phone? So a second intervention that I'll be talking to you about today was really about easing these skill constraints via digital capabilities training. And then there's sort of a third set of barriers around gender norms and use cases that really make sense for women's lives. I'm putting this in parentheses because we did this, so there's no way I'm going to have time to tell you about it in 15 minutes. So, come talk to me later if you want to learn about that piece of the project. And so, the idea is to kind of tell you about these interventions designed to address these barriers in the state of Chhattisgarh. So for those of you that don't know about Chhattisgarh, state in India, it's kind of like, I would think of it as one of India's lower income states, but like pretty well run. They've made a decent amount of progress in recent years, as you can see on the left-hand side. And we started working in Chhattisgarh in 2018 because we learned, after doing this kind of landscaping work, that they had started this kind of ambitious free smartphone distribution, which is called Project Sky. And the idea of the program was to give a free smartphone with about, I think, 6 to 12 months of free data to all the female heads of all rural households. It was kind of a local phone that was not of the highest connectivity. They also mapped out areas that didn't have 4G LTE coverage and built cell phone towers in those areas. They did this between August and September of 2018, distributed almost 3 million phones, and then kind of halted the program midway through because an election was taking place. And in theory, there was some digital literacy training that was meant to go with this program, but they really didn't do it, which is often, I feel like this is the canonical last mile program. They sort of did a great job of giving out the phones, building the capacity of women, like maybe not so much. I think my sense is that's also something that happened in Rajasthan more recently. So we were really excited about this program because it's really hitting that first economic constraint and provides a platform upon which you can study the effect of additional interventions, sort of taking that first economic constraint away by putting phones in the hands of women. So what we decided to do is, oh, that was weird. What we decided to do is first, set up a project where we could study the effect of Sky, but then also study the effect of add-on interventions. And the one I want to talk to you about today is, a woman-centered digital capability training. We actually did like a landscaping in India when we started this project and couldn't find any trainings that we thought would be really impactful. So the bad habit of doing this, we decided to design our own. And really it was like, you could think of this as like smartphone 101. And we taught really basic skills, like how do you turn on the phone? How do you make sure the internet is working? How do you dial a call? How do you receive a call? How do you take a picture? How do you do a voice search? Because we wanted to kind of find a way of getting even lower skilled women engaged with the internet. We did this all in very small groups. We had a lot of interactive practice, so people would work together, try out these new skills. You can see a picture of a woman taking a picture there. Lasted for about 40 minutes, and then people got this sort of pictorial take-home brochure so that they could, continue to practice on their own time at home. All right, and so the way that we set this project up was to study Sky, both in terms of its short and long-term effects, as well as this digital capabilities training and the woman-centered use case that I'm not going to be able to tell you about. And so the first thing that we did is we're going to use a randomized controlled trial to evaluate the effect of the use case and the training. And what we did is we timed our baseline survey so that a randomly selected half of villages were interviewed just before Sky distribution, and a randomly selected half were interviewed just after Sky distribution. And if you kind of assume that nothing else changes in this 2 to 3 week window, it's going to give you kind of the very, very short run effect of the program and let us kind of learn what's happening as soon as these phones hit households. Then within that, we randomized villages to either pure control or, kind of any treatment. And then within treatment villages, some women received just training and other women received training plus the use case, okay? So in order to understand the long run effect of Sky, what we are doing is sort of a regression discontinuity approach. The state made this very convenient rule for us that an eligible village had to have at least 1,000 population for the 2011 Indian census. And what we did is designed a survey, a very large scale survey in 13 of Chhattisgarh's 33 districts. We went to almost 700 Gram Panchayat is kind of like the lowest level of local government in India. It's like a collection of 2 to 3 villages. We ended up serving about 20,000 people, 10,000 women, 10,000 men, also village level key informant interviewers. And this took place about 5 years post Sky. So this is really, I guess for the policymakers in the room, I think our objective here was to say, okay, like we made this infrastructure investment, like what does it do in the long run? Like, does this matter? Okay, and so what did it do? So let's start with Sky. So, in the short run, it did a lot, and the government did a really good job of distributing phones. So what you can see is that at our baseline, prior to Sky, about 44% of households had a smartphone. This is in 2018. Sky basically took it up to 100%, right? So you're really bringing like half the population online for the first time. And then we asked about kind of gendered ownership of phones. You can see that only 5% of women had their own smartphone prior to the program. This took it up to almost 60%. And you can see this isn't, going up to 100% because these phones, of course, are assets that can move across people. And we see an increase in the share of men who say, I now own a phone, right? So there's some kind of transfer of the phones even in the very short run in our data. And that's fine. It's like nice to own a phone, but then the question is like, okay, well, what do you do with it, right? And so what I'm graphing here is just the change. We asked like a bunch of different advanced tasks. So I think this is like, did you send a WhatsApp in the past month? Did you search the internet? Did you take a picture? Did you watch a video? This is just the percentage of things that people have sort of done. And what you can see is that for husbands, they've done about 23% of these tasks prior to Sky. This goes up by 12 percentage points. Just in the 2 to 3 weeks after the phones have been distributed, we see a smaller base and a smaller effect for women. So what's interesting is while this program closed, in the short run, it closed gender gaps in ownership, it actually exacerbated gender gaps in use, okay? Because this treatment effect is actually larger for men than it is for women. So we might worry a little bit about that. One thing that's nice is we're very concerned about gender norms in this setting. So we asked a bunch of questions around, is it appropriate for a married woman to use a phone without any supervision? What about with supervision? What about an unmarried woman? And what we see is that for both men and women, like people see phone use by women as more appropriate after the program. However, men are also 9 percentage points more likely to agree with the statement that men have more use for a phone than women, right? So it seems like a little bit of a mixed message in the short run. So the question is, what happens in the long run? Well, the regression discontinuity approach works. We have a big effect, like, about 60% of people we serve in the long run said, yes, indeed, I got a phone from Sky, but only 10% of recipients still have this phone 5 years later. If you ask them why, they say, oh, well, this thing broke, right? So this is really like a question of what happens after that initial push kind of expires. And the answer is that very little, in the sense that, one massive increase in household level smartphone ownership between when we did the baseline and this long run survey. It's going up to 84% of households across Chhattisgarh have at least one smartphone in the house. Only 18% of women do. Huge gender gap, absolutely no effect of the program. We can kind of look at other things, like we can look at phone use. We can look at gender norms around phone use. We look at DFS use. There's absolutely no change in any of these outcomes, among those who received and didn't receive the program. So, in the long run, this free distribution is not really moving the needle. I'm going to show you that there's hope. Now let's think about, okay, well, what happens if we invest in skills? One thing that I think is very important from a gender perspective, a phone is an asset that can be transferred across people. A government can give a phone, put it in a woman's hands. Like once that phone leaves and goes into her household, we don't know where it's going to go. You invest in what a woman knows and what she's able to do. Nobody can take that away from her, right? So what happens with training? Well, the training didn't do much for women's phone ownership. This is now from our Endline survey. This happened about 2.5 years. This is about 2.5 years after we did the training, about 3.5 years after Project Sky. However, we see a significant increase in phone use, both in terms of very basic tasks, so kind of like, did you talk to somebody, did you send an SMS, as well as these more advanced tasks. So taking a photo, using the internet. We actually see, I think, about a 3 percentage point increase in checking financial information online off of a very low base of about 7% for you DFS folks. So very low rates of DFS use among these women, but this training helps, even though we didn't train people on DFS skills. Okay, and we also see kind of no effect on norms expressed by husbands, but this training 2.5 to 3.5 years later is increasing the share of women who see phone use as something that is appropriate to do. And that's not all. It looks like this has knock-on effects to downstream outcomes, right? So one thing that we note, and this project kind of spanned COVID, is that women who are trained on phones have slightly deeper networks and spend more time talking on the phone to relatives. And alongside this, we see a significant improvement in mental health. So this is 65% of women that we surveyed said that they had felt down or depressed in the past, I think, 1 to 2 weeks since we interviewed them, which is very high. Goes down by 7 percentage points, due to this training that women had received 2.5 years later. So the hypothesis there is that the training kind of by improving social networks, may have really mattered for people's well-being, especially in this kind of post-COVID context. So what have we learned from all of this? Free distribution kind of works in the short run, but impacts fade out in the long run. I should say this is all very preliminary work. We do have a pre-analysis plan. We haven't really looked at heterogeneity, so this is something that is very much on our to-do list, is to really understand, perhaps in these areas where that overall growth in smartphone ownership is more modest, maybe we see more effects there. So please stay tuned. However, investing in women's digital capabilities, right, the thing that cannot be transferred within the household, yields lasting benefits. This is not just in terms of phone use, but also in broader markers of well-being. And what I find very interesting, I just want to point out, is this to me points to intra-household barriers to learning. Like all these households have smartphones. The men are doing tons of stuff, and women are not learning how to do it unless we teach them. And I think that that's something very important to be thinking about in these contexts. And I didn't have time to talk about this, kind of gender intentional use case. We actually see limited add-on effects of that as well. And so really the winner here, within this context is training. Thank you.